So as I said, today is World Communion Sunday, and Christians everywhere celebrate the sacrament of Holy Communion in recognition of the amazing grace of God, which we know through Jesus the Christ. We celebrate the new covenant created through Emmanuel, God with us, God incarnate. So interestingly, we talk today about both the Abrahamic covenant and the new covenant instituted through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. We've been talking about God's covenant with Abram and with Sarah for the last several weeks. God asked them to set out for a land unknown and promised that eventually they would own much land and have countless numbers of heirs. And so they went. When we met them last week, you'll recall that Abram was 99 and Sarah was 90. They received new names, Abraham and Sarah, and were reminded of God's promise of progeny, land, and legacy. And clarification was made that their lineage would stem from a child born of the two of them. Needless to say, Abraham and Sarah were having difficulty understanding how this could possibly happen at their advanced stages. We find that Abraham has held up his part of the covenant that God asked, and the males have all been circumcised. Today, we meet him and his entourage resting in the heat of the day under the trees which offer some protection from the blazing sun. It's siesta time to rest and refresh. It was customary for most everyone to be lying low at this particular time of day. Suddenly, Abraham sees three strangers coming toward him. What in the world are they doing out traveling at this time in this scorching heat? Never mind. Abraham shifts into full hospitality mode. And this was very typical of Bedouins. Without the gracious care of strangers, travelers would likely perish in this rough terrain. People depended on others, and most didn't hesitate to offer the things that they too would need in the same situation. Abraham acts with haste. Run, hurry, quickly. Interesting. Rather than hurry up and wait, this is a situation of wait 24 years and hurry up. Abraham doesn't realize that these are representatives of the Holy One that he's encountered. In fact, the writer clues us in that one of them is actually God incognito, God in disguise. God appears as a human to deliver an update on the covenant, this promise of a child that was made so many years before. And Abraham is a most gracious host. He offers them water to wash the dust and grime from their feet and water to quench their thirst. He has Sarah bake fine bread. He commands a servant to kill the fatted calf, and he brings them not just water, but milk and butter to refresh them and make this an especially first-rate meal. But why? Why go to all this trouble for three people he didn't even know? We don't really know why, but perhaps it's because Abraham himself knows what it is to be a wanderer, a stranger in a foreign land. He also knows that God has blessed him richly, and so he shares his blessing generously with others. I wonder, how much do we emulate Father Abraham? Are we generous in sharing our blessings? Do we not only welcome the stranger, but go out of our way to offer them the finest we have? Do we make them comfortable, expecting nothing in return? Do we see them as people more like us than different? Do we ever think about the notion that we could actually be looking at the face of God there in that other, that guest, that visitor? There's a beautiful story of a cobbler who received a message in a dream that Christ was going to visit him on Christmas Eve one year. He was beside himself with excitement and waited anxiously all day to greet his Lord. As he waited, he ended up inviting a street sweeper to come in and warm himself and enjoy a hot beverage. He also welcomed a woman who was ill with an infant in her arms to rest a while, eat something, and he gave her shoeless baby a new pair of shoes he had just completed. Hour after hour went by, and many needy souls shared the meager hospitality of the old cobbler. But the expected guest did not appear. He went to bed disappointed. It was only a dream, he sighed. I did hope and believe, but he has not come. Suddenly the room was flooded with a glorious light, and to the cobbler's astonished vision there appeared before him one by one the street sweeper, the sick mother and her baby, and all the people whom he had aided during the day. Each one smiled at him and asked, "Have you not seen me? Did I not sit at your table?" And then they vanished. As Paul writes in Hebrews 13:2, don't neglect to open your homes to guests, because by doing this, some have been hosts to angels without knowing it. Abraham actually came face to face with God. Abraham communed with God. It seems that God wanted to clarify that the promise of an heir was really about to come true. And he wanted to be sure that Sarah heard it straight from the Holy One rather than through Abraham. While Sarah is hiding behind the tent flap, listening, because women weren't allowed to join a meal and conversation of the men in that day, the stranger makes it clear that within the year, she will bear a son. Now Sarah has been holding on to the promise God made, but clearly she has figured that the way she thought it would work out was clearly not what God had in mind. And then she hears that she will give birth to a son within the year, and Sarah laughs. Now, there's so much speculation about what that laugh means. Was it a snicker of disbelief? Ha, 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 right, a 90-year-old woman who is physically incapable of conceiving a child is going to have a baby. Sure, God. Was it a laugh of cynicism? When God asks her, she denies the laugh. But God confronts her with the truth and then asks this amazing question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Other translations use the word difficult. But my favorite are the ones that read, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? It's a question all of us should seriously consider. When we just can't imagine, God can. When we doubt it could ever happen, God knows it can. When we are afraid to hope and afraid not to hope, God will do wonderful things and surprise us with grace and mercy and never-ending love. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Our God took on flesh, came to live among us, taught and healed. When we rejected Jesus, mocked him, whipped him, crucified him, thought we were finally rid of him, God was there with something too wonderful. From death came resurrection. From an end came a new beginning. From bread and wine came a promise of new covenant. Whoever believes in me will live. May we remember that we are beloved children of Abraham and Sarah, heirs of a promise that God is with us always. And nothing is too wonderful for God. Thanks be to God. Amen.